episode is brought to you by Premensal.
It is this perfect storm because at a time in our life where midlife women are frantically busy and have enormous demands and responsibilities, it is also the time where our bodies are causing such significant change that we're actually able to juggle and cope with less.
Welcome back to Season 13 of Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Australia, where we talk all things midlife, mindset and menopause. I'm Zoe Mernier, the editor of Prevention, and today we're diving into a topic that hits close to home for so many women, and that's stress. That creeping sense of overwhelm that can feel all-consuming, especially during perimenopause and menopause. To help us unpack why this stage of life can be so emotionally challenging and, more importantly, what we can do about it, we're joined by someone who truly gets it. Kirstin Bouse is a clinical and forensic psychologist with more than 20 years' experience. She specialises in supporting women through all the complex, messy and beautiful parts of life, including this one. Kirstin, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. I get to talk about a favourite topic. So, lucky me.
Lucky us too. Okay, so can you start by sharing a bit about your background and what drew you to working with women going through perimenopause and menopause?
Sure. When I started in my private practice, which was about 20 years ago, I worked in the perinatal space. And this was actually when I got introduced to this idea of perimenopause. I was working with women who were having children perhaps a little later in life. And, they'd come to me and say, I'm having troubles conceiving. And, the fertility guy says it's because I'm in perimenopause. So I'm like, what's this kind of caper? What's this caper? And started to kind of get an understanding of it. But admittedly, it's like a confessional now, I really truly didn't understand the significance of it until I hit perimenopause myself, which I think is a familiar story for a lot of people, a lot of women in general. You kind of go, oh, okay, right, okay, this is a really big deal when you actually hit that stage. It was kind of due to that I really thought, no, I want to concentrate on working with women who are navigating these years. It was a couple of years that I'd been perimenopause before I realised, and yet I'd been speaking to doctors and specialists about what was going on for me, and nobody was mentioning that it could be perimenopause. And I kind of thought that's really uncool. And that really needs to change. I guess I was trying to work out what was going on for me psychologically, emotionally, my mood, all of that kind of stuff as well. And I needed to find psychs. But I couldn't find anyone who actually also knew what perimenopause was. And I was horrified that even within my own profession, it was a needle in a haystack. And again, I thought, well, that's the pot calling the kettle black as well. Like, I'm only just learning about this life stage. And so I thought, well, I've got to do something about that. So I do a lot of training for my colleagues in talk therapists. And I also decided I needed to make it easier for women who were wanting support for their emotional, psychological well-being to be able to find therapists who knew about this, which was one of the reasons I created All About Her, which is how you found me. So, yeah, a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's how I got into it. I just thought this needs to change. We need more education and all of that. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we know midlife is often described as like, I guess, a perfect storm. There's the hormonal changes, we've got busy careers, we're parenting teens, we've got aging parents. Why does this stage just feel so emotionally intense for women?
Yeah, well, you've kind of named all the reasons why.
Yeah.
There's nothing more magical to offer except to say that, perimenopause brings with it all those kind of neuroendocrine shifts. Our hormones are all over the place, but overall declining. And one of the outcomes of that is that we're actually more sensitive to stress. We're more sensitive to overwhelm. So it is this perfect storm because at a time in our life where all the research and anyone who's living it knows that midlife women are frantically busy and have enormous demands and responsibilities on their time, their money, and their headspace, their emotional bandwidth, it is also the time where our bodies are causing, such significant change that we're actually able to juggle and cope with less. And so the resources are less, but the demands are higher than ever. So, yeah, no wonder we're all kind of, and I say this with respect, we're kind of losing our minds.
Yeah, no, it's true. and I mean, I guess then you've got the symptoms as well that are kind of interacting here. So how do symptoms like poor sleep, mood swings and brain fog, how do they sort of contribute to the cycle of stress, I guess?
Yeah, of course. I mean, deprivation of sleep is a form of torture. It has been a form of torture in wartime. And, that really speaks to just how critical it actually is. And we know that when people are impacted by poor sleep, particularly regularly, then our cognitive capacity and functioning is reduced, our mood declines. Like it has this flow-on effect. It's why it's one of those bedrocks of well-being that we harp on about, is do everything you can to rest well and sleep well. And then, of course, at the same time, we do know that the hormonal shifts can actually contribute to low mood. It looks slightly different, but importantly different enough from a major depressive disorder, which is why it's often not picked. And the difference is that a major depressive disorder, you're typically looking for really consistent low mood, a whole bunch of symptoms, but consistently so. Whereas menopausal and perimenopausal depression kind of matches the fluctuations in hormones. So we can actually have really crappy low mood punctuated by quite an okay, if not a good mood. And that's what's confusing from a diagnosis perspective for uninformed GPs, mental health professionals, and of course the community. People in the community wouldn't know that. So hormonally driven, depression is a thing. And interestingly, if you've had a history of depression, particularly in pregnancy and postpartum, where it's also got a lot of hormonal stuff going on, then there is a somewhat of a greater risk of having depression during menopause as well, because the etiology of it is hormonally based, not necessarily circumstantially based, if that makes sense.
For sure. So I guess those sort of mood swings or that sort of that fluctuation, those depressive sort of episodes aren't necessarily related to the stressful events that might be happening in your life. Is that right?
Yeah. Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Although, if life's hunky-dory, that's going to be great. It's going to be helpful. But it's usually, I have not met one midlife woman who doesn't have some degree of stress beyond what really is ideal. I mean, we need stress to get out of bed. We know that. There's a level of stress which we all need to actually motivate us to get out of bed and do what we need to do. But there's certainly a point where it is too much, and certainly a point where too much for too long has a really negative impact. I think going back to the perfect storm, though, that you said, is that, yes, there can be the etiology of hormones causing menopausal depression. And in those instances, sometimes if women want to take hormonal therapy, that can be really, really helpful. When it's not helpful, there can be a number of reasons for that, one of which can be because the circumstances of their life are still too impactful. There's too much going on. Hormones can be fantastic for so many women, not so great for other women. It's definitely a choice for many women, and some women don't have the choice. But it doesn't actually prevent your parents aging and becoming unwell and passing away. It doesn't prevent the stresses of raising teenagers and young adults and everything that kind of comes with that. It doesn't counter the cost of living crisis that we're in. And that's what we need to really understand. And certainly psychologists, mental health professionals, we always take what's called a biopsychosocial perspective on anyone at any time that we're working with. We need to understand the biological component, the psychological component, and the social and cultural kind of component. They're all the context and contributing factors to somebody's well-being or not well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hot flushes? No sweat. Try Premensal Menopause products to relieve common menopausal symptoms for both perimenopausal and postmenopausal women. Promensal understands that hot flushes and night sweats are not the only things going on in your life. This is why Promensal has added 2 new products to their range. New Promensal Libido and Energy, because face it, we all could do with a boost of both. And new Promensal Brain Fog to help increase short-term memory, mental recall, and reduce cognitive fatigue. Now, where did I put my keys? Promensal provides premium holistic supplement care for women using evidence-based ingredients for products you can trust. Promensal is here to help you take control of your own health and live your best life. Plus, check out our brand new look in-store now. Always read the label and follow directions for use.
So what are some of the most common psychological or emotional challenges that women who are coming to you in perimenopause are facing?
Yeah, I think it's really there's quite a spectrum. I mean, we certainly get women certainly are attending therapy for anxiety and depression, and the statistics of surveys kind of show that somewhere in the 60 percentages, so 60, 69 through that range of women will experience symptoms of depression or anxiety.
Wow.
Just, a reasonable number. I certainly work with women who might come to me and they say, I was really managing my depression well, or my medication was working well, or my anxiety, I had all the tricks and I'd done a lot of work and was managing this mental health condition really well, and none of it's working anymore. Or my anxiety feels different to what it was before, or there's a different quality to my depression. So it is, it's a time where people can experience first-time mental health issues, but it's also a time when they can experience a recurrence. And that also includes trauma. So again, women may be coming or, seeking therapy saying, I have done so much trauma work in my lifetime. I've seen a psychologist. I really felt this was behind me. And yet it's all coming up again. And I think, we do know that from a neurobiological perspective, it's both a time of vulnerability and opportunity. And the vulnerability comes because there's just so much flux going on in the brain due to the flux in the hormones. It's opportune. It's also an opportune time because as we actually get a little bit of stability moving towards menopause itself, the brain is remarkably neuroplastic. And with that stability in hormones, it can start to try and compensate for what was missing. But while it's changing so much, while the hormones are changing quite so much, it kind of nothing stays the same long enough for that compensation to kick in. So we know that estrogen, for example, is often referred to as neuroprotective. It's protective in many ways to our health. We also know that we've got estrogen receptors everywhere. And once we're not providing it with estrogen because we're not making it anymore, at least the type of estrogen that's the most potent, because there's 3 types, we actually know that on many levels our health starts to take a bit of a hit. And so the risks of a number of kind of health conditions really escalate during midlife. And that also does include mental health. It's the same kind of thing, this beautiful estrogen that does have this neuroprotective effect. As it actually declines, then we lose that kind of blanket of protection, so to speak. And then on top of that, why is this happening during women's lives? And it is because we do have a number of significant life events which might be normal for the course of life. It is normal for our children to grow up and leave home, and it's normal for our parents to age and pass away. But those can be very difficult experiences. And so we can have a very normal human reaction to those, which is grief or loss or stress or any of that kind of stuff. So we can't look at any one single factor as being the sole cause. It's always a multitude of things. But I do think there's an overall picture that I hear time and time and time again, that women would be able to move through this period of their life if there was more support. And I use that term really, really broadly to include a range of things like education, access to treatment of their choice, that whether that's a more complementary medicine or whether that's traditional medicine and hormones, whether it's psychological therapy, as well as that capacity to maybe rest more, slow life down, not have many demands, not have as many pressures, like all of these kinds of factors. In addition to acknowledging the significance of this stage of life and that it is a tricky stage of life, all of that could actually make quite a difference for quite a lot of women, but we're not there yet.
No. I mean, do you think there's a tendency for women to even themselves, I guess, dismiss their own stress or think that it's something that they just need to push through, especially if it's, if it's more just a stress rather than, a definite sort of mental health issue?
Women are brilliant, terribly so, but they're brilliant at pushing on, soldiering on, continuing on. And for some, this is the first time in their life where I mentioned the resources are lower because of everything that's going on hormonally. It's the first time, though, that they can't push through. I don't know the stats on this, but certainly my experience, and I've worked with thousands of women at this stage now over the course of my career. I really don't know whether I've met a midlife woman who is not close to burnout or burnt out. Like they go hand in hand, which is often also why the diagnosis, shall we say, for want of a better word, of perimenopause, the recognition of that perimenopause is one of the things going on. That can be why it takes a longer time to be able to spot that, because there is quite a significant overlap in the early symptoms of perimenopause, which are the fatigue, the mood, the lower tolerance for stress. Those kinds of factors are the early signs of perimenopause. They're also the early signs of burnout. So it can be difficult to distinguish between the two. Not that we have to, because they're often concurrent. They often do coexist together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, is there a way to tell the difference between, if a woman's out there going, well, I'm stressed. I'm very stressed and I've got this stuff going on in my life, but the difference between, I guess, normal stress and then something more serious like anxiety or depression?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, again, it's this, we always look for change. Psychologists are like, what's changed? Probably doctors too, in some ways, in terms of how you're feeling. And if it's the same, okay, that's good. And if something's changed, it's like, what's that about? And so for women who if they're coming and saying to me or to a GP or to a friend, like, I can't cope like I used to, or I'm not able to bounce back like I used to, or my mood is, I've had down days before. Of course, I've had difficult times before, but I just can't shake this low feeling. That's when we start to pay attention. Now, we can't automatically attribute that to perimenopause, but it's certainly something that's like, well, this is worthy of a discussion with some kind of health professional, someone who holds that knowledge, and to just kind of, start being curious as to what that's about.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk solutions. We've got the state of affairs, which is a little grim, but what are some psychological tools or approaches that you recommend to help manage stress through this life stage?
Yeah, this is the magic question, isn't it? Because often to reduce our stress, which is really what is ideal, rather than try and increase our capacity for it, because that's kind of compromised, it's about reducing our stress. And that can be really difficult because often that requires women to ask for help, persist in asking for help, accept help, delegate, not do it all, and at a time when they're least resourced to do that. So I was having a conversation earlier today with a colleague who works in this space as well, and we were kind of talking about how we can have some really seemingly benign conversations with clients, and those conversations might well be around running a home, for example. And it seems a lot of money to pay to see a psychologist to talk about how can I not do so much in the home? How can I get more help in the home? But the issue with that is there's so many expectations. Firstly, there's a dynamic that's probably been set, so it's just kind of business as usual. Secondly, there's expectations that we've taken on board either unknowingly or knowingly, but nonetheless take them on board, that we kind of do it all or do a vast majority of it. So much of what we do is unseen, invisible. We know the mental load, the emotional load, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's all these social expectations as to what makes a good wife, a good mother, a good woman, a good daughter. All of these kinds of things are at play. And so to actually step back, which is what is required, to slow down, to pull back in some way, shape, or form, very reasonably so, because most women are over-functioning, requires us to actually speak to people in our world and say, I actually need you to step up here. This actually isn't my responsibility alone. It is a shared responsibility now, and I need you to step up. And that requires courage, conviction. It requires persistence, because not everyone's sitting there going, yeah, sure, I'm going to help out. Of course, I'll be so helpful. Or if they say it, the delivery of it sometimes is where things go amiss. So that's definitely one thing. We've got too much on our plate, and we shouldn't have that much on our plate. It's not fair. It's not reasonable. And we need to offload some of that. And then we also, at the same time, do need to do everything we can to prioritize sleep, which is, I know I get laughs when I say that, because it's one of the first things that's affected by perimenopause. But it is about what can we tweak in our lives to make good sleep a priority? How can we change our habits to be able to do that? What can we engage in as well that helps calm our nervous system? For some people, it might be yoga. For some people, it might be reading. For some people, it might be walking. Some people, it might be singing, dancing. I don't know. But finding things that actually really, at the very least, give us moments of calm. And that we can have moments of calm, whether they're 5 minutes or whether they're an hour or even longer. And the funny thing is, we know that play and joy and pleasure are very, very good antidotes to stress. So how can we bring more of those into our lives? And interestingly, midlife women are typically craving reconnecting with some of the things that they've had to shelve while they're raising families and they're caring for, kind of elderly parents and building careers and nailing it in that department as well. So that would be a priority. Low-key exercise. Now is not the time to start running marathons if you've never run marathons. If you already are, keep doing it if you love it. But now is not the time to be doing high-intensity stuff that actually raises your cortisol. Ideally, you'd be engaging in things that help your health and fitness, but also your well-being, good nutrition, all the basics. I know it sounds so trite, but they really, really are important things. Being around people you like being around, that's another thing. Who wants to be around people you don't like being around? So try to balance that, because that as well is stressful for us. So a whole bunch of basics, as well as making, asserting yourself boundaries. And that's the tricky one.
Absolutely. Now, you often also speak about the power of mindfulness and self-awareness. How can those practices help shift the way we respond to stress?
Well, I think one of the key things is when we actually understand ourselves and when we understand what's going on within us, it creates a different relationship with what's actually going on. Like if you're completely confused and bewildered and baffled as to why on earth you're feeling the way you're feeling, it makes it scarier, and scarier makes it more stressful. So I think education is a really, really important thing. Understanding the nuts and bolts of this stage of life, for example. That's what I mean by education. And then appreciating what we're bringing to this stage of life. I actually do remember my own naturopath saying to me, perimenopause, it's a time of reckoning, or your chickens will come home to roost or have come home to roost. All the areas in your life that you haven't tended to, that really you should have tended to, whether it is your mental health, whether it's your physical health, whether it's relationships, whether it's your career, your finances, all these things do seem to come to a head. And slowly but surely tending to those, understanding what they are. Where's the unfinished business in your life? I know that's a really kind of cliche psych thing to say, but it's true. This is the stuff that comes and bites us on the bum, and causes us stress. And these are the kinds of things that if we know that about ourselves, we can start making sense of it, and we can start kind of working through that stuff and addressing it.
I mean, so many women, we're caring by nature. We look after everyone else and we put ourselves last, that's just, something that we've grown up doing or that comes naturally to us, I guess. So what is your advice for someone like that who really struggles to prioritize their own well-being?
Yeah. Well, the really interesting thing is that in some circles, estrogen is actually referred to as the hormone of accommodation and servitude. So it's the hormone that has us driven to kind of, have children and revolve our lives around them so that the species continues, all of that kind of evolutionary biological stuff, which is really interesting because as it declines, then it goes without saying that our biological drive to accommodate and serve goes with it. And I see that all the time. It may not disappear entirely. And of course, we still love if we're going to love our husbands and partners and kids and things, that's not going to change. But our inclination to use all our resources, our headspace, our energy, our time, even our money does start to shift. And we actually have this natural movement towards, hang on, I want a bit more time for myself, or I want to catch up with my girlfriends more, or for some people, it's on a really grand scale. I want to change my whole life. I don't want a career anymore. There, whether it's big or small, there's a shift in how we want to be in the world. There's a shift in what's important to us and how we want to spend our time and our resources. Not enough to, as I said, to say, see you later, I'm not going to be a mother anymore, get out of here, kids. Although some people might say that to husbands, but, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. It's more a desire to reshuffle proportions of energy and resources, shall we say. So it's really interesting that there's this natural biologically driven shift. The challenge is it still pushes up against the social norms and the messages, as I was saying before, of good wife, good mother, good partner, good daughter, all of that kind of stuff. And that, to be honest, requires some pretty heavy introspection around what your belief systems are. It really requires an understanding of the overt, but particularly the covert nature of the patriarchal system that we live in, and how it really, really sets women up to feel guilty if they actually want to reduce this load that they're always carrying. And so I won't get on my rant about all of that kind of stuff, but it's a very reflective time, and it's really time for women to start thinking about how do you want to live your life and how do you want to set yourself up for this next chapter of your life, where in some ways you might actually find more freedom just by virtue of, terribly, I know it's sad, but parents passing away, children growing up and leaving home. There can be a freedom that comes with that. That, having said that, that is also for women who are what I would call privileged in the broader sense of the word. So I'm not talking about super wealthy. I'm just saying those of us who have choices and opportunities, and a lot of women don't have that. A lot of women will not actually be able to navigate this in the same way because, as an example, they'll have to continue to work full-time, really long hours, shift work or hardcore work, even though they're really struggling. They might be on their own and therefore they can't get the help that they need. They might have health issues to manage. There's a lot of factors that kind of come into play that can make this possible for some and really, really, really difficult for others.
Yeah, either way, I mean, I think obviously there's often a huge identity shift. Like, so if you are someone that has grown up as this, I am this nurturing, person, and then you're feeling different. So I guess, yeah, what's your advice to women that really feel like they've kind of lost themselves or lost their sense of who they are, and really, again, struggling with all this other stuff as well, and then trying to figure out who the heck they are in the middle of all that? What would you say to help them reconnect with who they are?
Yeah. So again, what's interesting is perimenopause is often referred to as reverse puberty. In that, in puberty, your hormones are going all over the place, but on the incline, and it's in reverse in perimenopause. And the interesting thing about that, even though that's just kind of talking about hormones, is that the research also shows that the psychological tensions of adolescence are very similar to the psychological tensions of perimenopause. And those tensions are things like, who am I? Where do I belong? What's important to me? How do I want to live my life? What is it? Their sexual identity, their relationships with their peers, all of this stuff. I mean, who wants to go back to being adolescent, right? Not many people want to go back there because it's tricky. It's tricky to navigate those things, but they are actually, we accept as a society that they are really normal things for adolescents to grapple with. And we also provide the support to help them do that because it lays the foundation for adulthood. So the first thing I would say to women is this is the same. When there's research that's been done and they've spoken to thousands of perimenopausal women about what's going on for them in perimenopause, once they get past the hot flushes and, all the usual kind of symptom-based stuff, they will talk about things, and the research, qualitative stuff has been crunched and worked out, they are grappling with the same psychological tensions. So my first thing would be to say, this is normal. That would be my first piece of advice, to actually be saying, I don't know who I am. I don't recognize myself. What's important to me? I don't like that anymore, but I used to I've built my life as best I can to be something that I love, and I did, but I don't now. And what the hell is going on with that? That is really, really normal. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a bit of bad news. And the bad news is we don't sort this out quickly. It's very much a transition. The perimenopausal transition, hormonally, all over the shop, many years before there's stability. And the same thing happens for us psychologically. So if I could give a piece of advice other than reminding people or letting people know it's very normal, it would be to try as much as possible, get the support so you're not suffering. So whatever that might look like, I don't want women to suffer. But when we move from suffering to discomfort is where growth is. We know that. Plenty of humans will know that they grow, that we only grow when we're a little bit uncomfortable, really.
Sad but true.
Can we approach this with curiosity? What's going on for me? What don't I like about that anymore? Do I have an idea of what I would like? Where can I play? And I use that word really loosely. Like, how can I experiment in a safe way without blowing up my life, to find out who I am and what actually suits me now? Can I try something for a period of time without me approaching it as this is how it's going to be? Because I do find a lot of women are like, okay, cool, I'm a new woman now and I'm going to work out who that is. And they then get paralyzed by the next decision I make has to be the right one. And that might be whether they sign up to learn a language, like, okay, I think I want to learn a language. Geez, that better be the right thing for me. And because they're so intent on that decision being the next right decision, they don't do it, because what if they're wrong? Whereas take a more curious, experimental approach of, I've always thought I might want to learn a language. Let's give that a crack and see. And if I don't like it, I don't continue it. It's the wonderful choice of being an adult. And so to see that as experimentation and play and curiosity rather than as failure or I'm flaky, that kind of thing. It's very much a time, again, like adolescence, where we need to give ourselves grace to work it out over time, what's important for us and who we want to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, is there any other key message that you want to give women just about managing stress in menopause?
It would be to do the thing that is so contrary to us, and that is actually putting ourselves first more often than not. And other people will benefit. It might be tricky for a period of time. As I said, nobody's rushing to suddenly take over all the cooking and the cleaning and the planning that goes on in our heads for our families and things. They're not itching to do that, but it is really important that women start to find ways to delegate small things. And then in that space that's created, that they don't fill it with more stuff unless it's going to give them a sense of peace or calm or joy or something like that, because we are very good at just piling things on our plates as well. And it's a long game. I wish I could say we can have this nailed very quickly. But, we know that perimenopause is that kind of 3, 10, 11-year time frame. I think one of the critical things that make it even more stressful is we don't get a ticket at the beginning to say yours is going to be 5 years, yours is going to be 2, and yours is going to be 9. Like, we don't know how long we're going to be in this state of flux. But we are very resilient women, and we can do it. We just need bunches of grace and self-compassion, patience and curiosity, and legit support too. As I said, if you're suffering, speak to the right professionals so that you don't have to continue to suffer.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But Kirstin, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, warmth and practical tools with us today. I think many women will walk away feeling very more seen and more supported. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. And listeners, thank you for listening as well. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love you to like, review and subscribe. You can find more expert advice on navigating perimenopause and menopause at preventionaus.com.au. And of course, don't forget to pick up a copy of Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier. Thank you for listening. And until next time, keep thriving.